Okay, so get ready. Because on this deep dive, we're going to be talking about someone who embodies like this real classic American story. We're talking about J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
This is a guy who went from a really, really rough upbringing in Appalachia
Right.
to a seat in the U.S. Senate.
Absolutely.
And we're going to try to figure out how, like, what that journey even looks like
Yeah.
and what it says about the American dream,
It's fascinating.
about opportunity, about just the state of things in the country today.
You know, it's interesting because Vance's story, it's not like this isolated thing, you know?
Yeah.
It really gets at these like big, huge questions that we're all thinking about right now about America.
Yeah.
But before we get too ahead of ourselves, I think it's good to like rewind all the way back to the beginning.
Okay.
Vance's childhood, I mean, it
wasn't pretty.
No, not a cakewalk. Let's just put it that way.
Definitely not a cakewalk. We're talking Middletown, Ohio.
Right.
This is a town that was hit hard when all the factories closed.
Yeah.
Right in the heart of the Rust Belt.
Absolutely.
And you have to imagine just what that does to a community.
Oh, yeah.
To families.
The ripple effect.
And for Vance, it meant facing poverty, instability, and even dealing with his mom's struggles with addiction.
Yeah.
Which, sadly, is something that's become all too common
Yeah.
in these towns that have seen better days.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And it's like, it's bigger than just him, right?
Yeah.
This is systemic, the
I
lack
know,
of
like
opportunity,
the whole
the
system.
breakdown of support systems. But here's where things get interesting.
Okay.
In the middle of all this chaos,
Yeah.
Vance finds an anchor.
Okay.
His grandparents, and especially his mama,
Right.
she is like this bedrock of stability for him in a world that feels like
Oh,
anything but,
yeah.
you know.
It's interesting you say that because she really comes to life
Oh, she
in
does.
his book Hillbilly Elegy.
She's such a character.
You really get a sense of her grit,
Yeah.
her determination.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like, how much did that influence him?
Right.
Like, how much does having someone like that in your corner
It's huge.
matter when you're facing those kinds of challenges?
That's like the question, right? Like, how much does our environment shape who we become?
Yeah.
And it's something that he really wrestles with, like, throughout his life.
Right.
But I think it's also important to say that he wasn't content to just be a product of his environment, you know?
Okay.
He makes a really interesting decision after high school.
Okay.
He joins the Marines,
Wow.
serves in Iraq.
Wow. Okay.
So it's like he's searching for something,
Mm.
a different kind of challenge,
Yeah.
a way to break free.
Talk about a 180.
Right.
Going from Middletown to the deserts of Iraq.
Totally.
It's not exactly a small step.
It's a big one.
So what do you think drew him to the military? What kind of impact did that have on him?
Well, I think for a lot of young people, especially from tough backgrounds,
Yeah.
the military represents structure, discipline, a chance to prove yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It offers a way out of a cycle of poverty that can feel inescapable.
Right.
And in Vance's case, I think it really did provide that for him, you know?
Okay.
A sense of purpose,
Yeah.
new skills,
Right.
a chance to test his own limits. But here's the thing. He doesn't stop there.
Okay.
He comes back from service and he goes straight to college.
Well-
Ohio State first,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Yeah.
Yale Law School.
Yale Law. Hold on a second.
Right.
We're talking about a kid who grew up surrounded by poverty,
Oh, no.
hardship,
Yeah.
and he's suddenly at Yale Law School
It's a wild turn of events.
with, like, the future elite of America.
Mixing with the best of them.
That's a wild turn of events.
It is.
What was going through his mind?
Right.
Did he feel out of place?
You know, that's a question that I bet a lot of people who read Hillbilly Elegy ask themselves, right?
Yeah.
Because here's this guy who's seen the underbelly of America, who's experienced firsthand the struggles that so many people face,
Mm-hmm.
and now he's at one of the most prestigious institutions in the country.
Yeah, and it's at Yale where he starts to really dig into those experiences. Right?
He does.
That's where Hillbilly Elegy is born.
Yeah.
And talk about timing.
Oh, my God.
The book comes out in 2016,
Right.
the same year Trump is elected.
It's wild.
Okay.
Like, what?
Yeah, and suddenly his story
Yeah.
becomes this, like, cultural lightning rod.
Oh, wow.
It's praised for being this really honest look
Yeah.
at the white working class,
Right.
a demographic that felt increasingly ignored
Yeah.
and misunderstood,
Yeah.
especially after Trump's victory.
It's like the country was primed for a story like his, you know?
Oh.
They were looking for answers.
Yeah,
Looking for someone to explain
just to make sense of it all.
what was happening in their own backyards.
Yeah,
And here comes Vance with this deeply personal,
right.
often heartbreaking account.
It's raw. Of what it means to be from a place that felt left behind.
100%. And whether you agree with, like, his analysis or not,
Right.
Hillbilly Elegy became, like, the book to read.
Right.
If you were trying to understand what had just happened,
Yeah.
this, like, political earthquake.
It definitely sparked a lot of debate.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It wasn't without its critics, though.
Of course not. No book like that is.
Right,
Okay.
right. But before we get into all that,
Okay.
let's just, like, take a step back
Yeah.
and really unpack this moment in his life.
Okay.
Because you have this kid who lived through some really tough stuff, serves his country,
Yeah.
climbs the academic ladder,
Right.
and then writes a memoir that becomes a national talking point.
Yeah, it's huge.
All before he even considers politics as a career.
I know, it's amazing.
How do you even begin to process all of that?
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to process.
Yeah, it really is wild. And just when you think you have him figured out, yeah, he takes another sharp turn,
Oh, I know, right?
finishes up at Yale Law,
Yeah.
and heads straight for Silicon Valley,
Of all places.
becomes a venture capitalist.
It's wild.
Not exactly what you'd expect from a guy who just wrote a bestseller about the struggles of working class America.
You'd think he'd be drawn to, like, public service or something, right?
Right.
Maybe working on policy issues?
Yeah. Or even like, going back to his roots, trying to make a difference.
Exactly. But instead, he goes to, like, the epicenter of, like, tech and wealth.
It's almost like he's trying to see how far he can push this whole American dream thing.
Right. It's like he's testing the limits or something.
Yeah, like, can you really go from where he came from to the top of the world?
And not just the top of one world, but, like, two completely different worlds.
It's fascinating, though, because even though he's now, hanging out with tech moguls and investors,
Totally different crowd.
the stuff he wrote about in Hillbilly Elegy,
Yeah.
it clearly still resonates with him,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to his views on politics.
Well, that's what makes Vance so interesting to, like, really analyze. He doesn't fit into any neat little box,
It's just full of surprises.
Exactly. And you see that, like, nowhere more clearly than in his early take on Donald Trump.
Oh, you mean back in 2016?
Yeah, like right when Trump was first coming onto the scene.
When most people thought he had no chance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what does Vance call him?
What?
Cultural heroin.
Cultural heroin. That's not exactly a glowing endorsement.
No, not at all. It's like a full-on critique.
Especially coming from someone who's seemed to understand, like, the anxieties of Trump's base better than almost anyone.
Right. He'd lived it. He'd written the book on it, literally.
So what changed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Because fast forward a few years,
Yeah.
and there he is,
Running for Senate.
fully embracing Trump and everything he stands for.
Talk about a plot twist.
Was it all just a calculated move?
You mean, did he just realize that to win in today's Republican Party,
Yeah.
you've got to be on board with the Mad J crowd?
Or did something deeper change in him? Like, did his worldview actually shift that much?
I mean, it's possible, right? People evolve, their views evolve.
True.
But it's hard to ignore the timing of it all, you know?
That's true. He announces his Senate run in 2021 after Trump's presidency, after January 6th.
Exactly. He knew exactly what he was getting into.
So what's the answer? Was it strategy or sincerity?
I don't know if there's, like, a simple answer to that.
Yeah.
Some people will say he just saw which way the wind was blowing and adjusted his sails accordingly.
Which, I mean, wouldn't be unheard of in politics.
Definitely not. But there are also those who say that his change of heart, so to speak,
Okay.
was more genuine,
Yeah.
that it came from a place of, like, real disillusionment with the establishment, with both parties,
Okay.
a belief that the elites, they weren't actually helping working Americans.
And you can't deny he really tapped into something during his campaign.
Oh, absolutely. He talked about the economy, about immigration.
Things that people were feeling really anxious about,
Exactly. That sense that the American dream was slipping away.
which were all themes from Hillbilly Elegy.
Right. It was like he was taking his own book and turning it into a political platform.
It was brilliant, actually, when you think about it.
It was. And let's not forget about Trump's endorsement.
Oh, right.
Love him or hate him, Trump had a way of connecting with a certain segment of the electorate.
For sure.
And for Vance, that endorsement was huge.
It gave him instant credibility with voters who might have otherwise written him off.
Exactly. Like, he was one of them.
He wasn't a cakewalk, though.
Oh, no, not at all.
He definitely faced his fair share of criticism.
Oh, yeah, even from within his own party.
People questioned his Silicon Valley ties.
Right. Like, how could he be a champion of the working class?
Right.
When he'd spent years in the world of like high finance.
It did seem a little contradictory
It did, and it raised these questions about authenticity.
about whether someone like him could really understand the struggles of everyday Americans.
Exactly. Had he gone too far from his roots,
It's like he was trying to bridge these two worlds.
which were drifting further and further apart.
And it left some people wondering, like, who was the real J.D. Vance? It's like he's living this kind of double life, you know?
It's true, and the thing is, that tension, it didn't just disappear when he got to the Senate.
Right. Like, if anything, it's probably even more intense now, right?
I think so. You see it in, like, everything he does.
In the way he votes.
Yeah, the legislation he supports.
And even just, like, the way he talks about his own party.
Absolutely. Sometimes he sounds like, a pretty traditional conservative,
Okay.
focused on things like limited government, fiscal responsibility, all that.
Right. The usual stuff.
But then other times he'll say something and it's like, whoa, where did that come from?
Like more of the populist anti-establishment stuff.
Exactly. That whole Magie energy.
So which is it? Is he a conservative deep down, just putting on this populist act?
Or is he trying to, like, create some kind of hybrid?
Like find a way to bridge the gap between these two sides of the Republican Party?
Yeah. Which, let's be real, feel like they're miles apart these days.
Totally. It's like they're speaking two different languages.
And the thing is, it's not just the Republican Party, right? This whole conservative populist split.
Right? It's like the whole country's divided.
Exactly. And Vance, he kind of embodies that whole struggle.
Yeah, he's like a walking, talking example of it.
So it makes you wonder, like, can he actually pull it off?
Can he be the one to bridge that divide?
I mean, it would be pretty impressive.
It would be more than impressive. It would be like historic.
Right. And not just for him, but for the country.
Because if someone like him can't figure out a way to bring these two sides together,
Who can?
it's a lot of pressure.
It is, and I don't envy him.
But it's also what makes his story so fascinating.
Totally, because it forces us to confront these really uncomfortable truths about America,
Yeah, about the challenges we're facing,
about the kind of leadership we need.
about who we are, really, at our core.
Exactly, and I think whether you agree with J.D. Vance's politics or not,
Right, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum.
his story, it offers this really valuable lesson.
What's that?
It reminds us that the American dream, it's not this one-size-fits-all thing.
Right. It's not as simple as we like to make it seem.
It's messy, it's complicated, and yeah, it's often full of contradictions.
And if we want to move forward as a country, we have to be honest about that.
We can't just ignore the messy parts.
We have to lean into the complexity, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
Because that discomfort, that's where the real conversations happen.
Well said.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners with this.
Yeah.
If you had J.D. Vance's ear for a day,
I like that.
what would you say to him? What questions would you ask? What would you want him to understand about the people and the places he now represents?
Ooh, that's a good one. Think on that, everyone.
And until next time, keep diving deep.